Welcome to the first of our series of In Conversation With, which is hosted by the club as part of our exhibition, Nullarbor Crossings, A History of Challenge. This has been made possible with the support of the RAC, West Cycle, Department of Transport and the Museum in Perth, and it runs in conjunction with Bike Month. Today we have the pleasure of listening to Bruce Hunt and Ken Norris reminisce about what was to be Bruce's successful attempt in 1974 on the Perth to Sydney cycling record, supported. We'll hopefully get an insight into how the attempt was organised, who went along, how it was sponsored, how the two support vehicles came to be, and some of the highlights of the ride, and some of the low points. Some of you know Bruce, and some of you may even know of his cycling highlights. For today, we're going to skip Bruce's pre and post Nullarbor ride and get straight into his Nullarbor attempt, given that this is what the exhibition is about. Joining Bruce is Ken Norris. I won't say too much about Ken, because I thought that we'd let Bruce sort of like introduce Ken and the reasons why he approached Ken to talk about the attempt and stuff like that. Let me say though, the Norris family are cycling legends, and we're very fortunate to have you. I'm very honoured. Thank you. So let me start this conversation by quickly painting the picture behind Bruce's record ride. We're in the mid-1970s. Bruce is 30 years of age. He's in peak form. He's consistently riding from scratch. He's winning races. He set the fastest time in the Beverley to Perth, and at the time the most prestigious race for professionals in WA. And he'd go on to set another fastest time in 1975. Bruce has ridden in the Australian professional road titles and held in Victoria, and Bruce has impressed the organisers with his ability and guile, and was encouraged by those organisers to compete in the prestigious Sun Tour in 1974. So Bruce is doing a lot of training, and he applies to ride in the Sun Tour, but he gets knocked back because, quote, he felt that he was unlikely to stand up to the rigours of the race. So Bruce, welcome. I imagine on receiving that rejection that you have a very bitter taste in your mouth and have something to prove. So why the Perth to Sydney record, and how did it all come about?
Well, initially, when I was rejected, they said, why don't you have a go at the Albany to Perth record? And I thought, well, nobody's really interested in Albany to Perth. Nobody knows where Albany is for a start. Not in the eastern states anyhow. So I thought, I guess it's after a couple of bottles of red. I said, how about having a go at the Perth to Sydney record? And I thought, how do I start? How do I get started, and how do I organise anything? And I mentioned it to Jenny Robinson, Peter Robinson's wife, who was at the bank, which I used to bank with. And she said, I know someone that might be able to put up some money. So she put me in touch with a guy named Bert Moylan from the Trotting Association, and I saw him, and he put it to the committee. He put it to the Gloucester Park, to the Trotting Committee, and they said, yeah, that could be a go. We can promote the WA Pacing Cup by going to Sydney, then racing against a trotter when you get to Sydney, which is, I was looking forward to that. And that didn't eventuate. Anyhow, that was a start. They put in, I think it was about $1,000. Nowhere near enough. And I had no idea of how I was going to get support. And I remember Marty Hopkins, anyone remembers Martin Hopkins, he said, I'll follow you in my little Austin 1100. And I thought, yeah, that's going to work well. But anyhow, he offered. And then somehow or other, I get a call from, I think it was from you. It was from Ken. He said, how are you going to do this? You don't understand what's necessary. I said, what's necessary? He said, you've got to have a referee, you've got to have an official timekeeper, you've got to have an official observer. I thought, good God, how am I going to find those? And so I said to Ken, how am I going to do this? He said, well, we'll see. And where did I go from there? Then what happened after that? I can't think.
Well, can I fill a little bit in?
Yeah.
When I met up Bruce somewhere, and he told me about the story about getting rejected for the Sun Tour. And he said, I'm going to do the record. And I said, how much training are you doing? And he said, 200 Ks a day. I said, well, who's organising this thing? And he said, well, I am. That's him. And I said, bullshit, you know, you can't do that. You know, you're riding every day. It's impossible, you know. So all the dots sort of come in line. I was recently appointed the secretary of a newly formed Coburn Cycle Club, and we used to run bingo to get enough coin to run races. And in the journey, we bought this Bedford bus that had a fridge and bunks and a stove. So that was the vehicle that we were going to use for the run. And then Benson and Hedges, sponsored through the pacing trotting crowd, yeah, they painted the bus and put all the decals on it. And then we recruited a couple of other deviates, Kevin Spencer, friend of, and Peter Robbie, and between them, that's how it all sort of come together. And then we found the sponsors, Tip Top Meats and Tip Top Bakeries.
Adidas, was it?
Oh, we had heaps and heaps of meat in the fridge. We were still eating the Tip Top meat on the way back, I think. So that it was the perfect vehicle. And I'm not sure where the combi come from.
The combi, it was my combi.
Oh, there you go.
My combi.
Okay, so that's the other bus.
Yeah.
The little combi bus.
Yeah.
And so there we go.
Yeah. So
Set the
yeah.
date.
So we got the wheels in motion, and I went to see the meteorological office in Perth, which was in Wellington Street then, and I said, look, I'm thinking of having a go, or I am having a go at a Perth-Sydney record. And they said, well, when are you going to do it? I said, well, I can't get everything together until November. They said, you're stupid. You'll be riding in the headwinds the whole time. You need to go now. This was in October. I said, you should go now. And even Ken said the same thing. You know, you're going to be battling headwinds. Won't be that bad. And anyhow, so set off from Forest Place, set off from Fremantle, and the first day I got out as far as Bullabulling, I think it was, which was just short of Coolgardie, and stopped for the night there. And progress was pretty good. By the time we got to Eucla, I was already, I think it was 12 or 13 hours up on the record by the time I got there. And again, still struggling against headwinds, so I had to ride longer than I ever anticipated riding. I was expecting to ride for maybe 12 hours a day, and it was turning out 14, 15, 16 hours because of the headwinds. Got to Eucla, well, got just short of Eucla, didn't make it to Eucla on that particular day, so I still had 40 miles to make the border. When I got to the border, it was the start of the unmade road, and it wasn't really a road as such, and I don't know how many of you have ever driven across the old air highway, but it's corrugations filled with bull dust, and the first part of it wasn't too bad. It was bumpy, but it wasn't too bad. But it slowly got worse and worse because there's no maintenance on the highway at all because they were building the new road. And I think it was just before Ivy Tanks, I kept falling off. I think Stan Hastings registered the fact that I'd fallen off 15 times, straight over the handlebars, because the front wheel had dropped into the holes full of bull dust, stopped, and I just catapulted over the top. And I think that caused a few injuries because I wasn't too fit at the end of the ride. But as ever, Peter Robinson come up with a novel idea to help me. He stood on the bull bar at the front of the bus going, left, right. So I was avoiding holes because I was getting a call. I'm not sure he was shouting or it was through the loudspeaker on the bus. I think it was a loudspeaker. So he's there with a microphone and calling out to me. I got onto the dirt 13 hours up on the record. I got off 6 hours down because it took so long. And there was one day there where at one point where it took me 3 hours to do 8 miles, 3 hours. And I was riding in the Spinifex because the road was unrideable. And I think that's it seemed a great idea. We could see the new road over there, and they carried me across in a deck chair over to the new road, and it only went for a short way, and they carried me right back here.
Can I cut in there a little bit? Just so you know, to do that ride, it's incredible in its own achievement. But Bruce was given 2 Peugeot bikes from the sponsor. And if anyone's got regular bikes, you'll know, I don't think we even checked the bikes other than to set it up for his position, okay? And we were
Only got it a week before.
We're coming up Claremont Hill, and it was an easy run, and he must have gone into a lighter gear, and Wayne would know very well, the chain link was stuck, and it flipped over a cog, and poor old Bruce landed on his nether ever, and I'm thinking, geez, he split his scrotum, and we're only gone 10 k's. So I drove ahead to the chemist shop and bought all these antiseptic gels I could buy.
And that was in the first hour.
And then became very friendly after that, applying that gel. But that was an amazing thing that he hurt himself in 10 k's and yet finished that journey. A lot less tubes. We used a lot of tubes on the way. Yeah. But that was amazing to think that you get that setback right at the start, and then you, to his credit, he put it all out aside and pushed on. Yeah.
It was only one of the pains.
Yeah.
One thing I'm aware of is Rob Slater, who is the Peugeot importer, who is importing racing bikes and the fold-up bikes, which we're using by the cricket teams and stuff like that. Tell us about the bikes themselves, because they weren't ideal for the record, were they?
No. The bikes are perfect bikes, but not for me. The top tubes were too long. The geometry was too steep. The head angle was too steep.
Very steep.
Yeah. So it's 74-degree head, which is the last thing you need for corrugated roads. But anyhow, only got the bikes the week before the record attempt, so I hadn't got time to really sort out any problems because I was still training on my other bike. But I think I couldn't even find it. I had a 2-inch headstem. I've never ridden a 2-inch headstem in my life, but it's the only way I could do it because it's a 23-inch top tube. Now, the bike would have been perfect for someone of a different stature than myself, but it just wasn't for me.
No, true.
But seeing as they put a lot of money in, you ride. So, yeah. But I can't even remember whether there was any problems with the bike because I think Peter Robinson was the mechanic. Did we have any problems with the bike, Peter?
Only punches.
Was it just...
When we were coming up to the main problem was when we were coming up to the cattle grids, the cars had braked heavily, and maybe some of the cattle grids were this much higher than the. So your edge tyres pretty low, so we were getting a lot of snake bite punches, and Kevin Spencer and myself were changing because they're all singles in those days. And we were changing punches quite rapidly. One time I was running alongside of Bruce, the gravel was bad, and I don't know whether he said or not, the bulldust filled in the potholes.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, he ran over the top.
Yeah, so you didn't know they were there. So the main thing, the only trouble with the bikes was the punches, but nowadays, they obviously, like Bruce was saying, they make gravel bikes, and we didn't know that you could ride
nice narrow
big
tyres here.
Yeah, we could have even had cyclocross tyres and stuff, but we just didn't know.
Yeah. But other than that, there was no real problems.
No, pretty good.
But once we got off the dirt road, I started to pick up time, and I think Peter was saying this imaginary rider, Brown. What's his first name? Vic Brown. Vic Brown. Yeah, this imaginary rider is 40 miles up the road. You've got to catch him. So, and that was how I was getting times. You're only 10 miles behind him now. And eventually I caught this imaginary rider. I didn't see him, but I caught him.
And we were plotting his progress now compared to Bruce's.
Yeah.
So it's pretty good.
Yeah. But I think the problem was I got on to Nullarbor station. The wind was so strong, we pulled the pin, or I pulled the pin, and we tied a piece of tape, or someone tied some tape on a piece of spinning tape where we stopped. You drove me in, I got driven into Nullarbor station and I rested, and the following morning I couldn't get up. I was smashed, couldn't move. So I stayed there, and everyone was saying, well, it's all over, Red Rover. And it looked like we was going to have to pull the bin. But 2 hours later, I started to come good. I said, right, lads, let's go. So we got back on the road, and within 2 days, within a day, I was back on record. Yeah, and I think it was, got to Adelaide, I think an hour ahead of the record, hour. Wasn't much anyhow. It was a matter of riding all night just to get there in time. So yes, so I got there, and I can't remember whether the South Australian Official Observer came all the way out or not.
No, I don't think so. A couple of things there along the way. I'm just going to try to fill the gaps, because this is like nearly a 50-year journey.
50 years ago.
And we're trying to rack our brains. But a couple of things was that when we hit that gravel road, anyone who rides gravel bikes, like when you see the Belgians riding on the Belgian cobbles, you use a higher gear. Well, not Bruce. Bruce wanted to spin. And of course that meant he slipped and slided. So I'd catch him, I'd shove the lever forward, put him in a bigger gear, and then he'd start off and he'd be okay because you're sort of driving over the rivets. And then I'd be watching his hand go back, pull him back again, then he'd go arse over tit again. So off we go again and did that. But he's already got you to Adelaide, but just out of Adelaide, Bruce enlightens me that him and Pammy had a lovely fish and chip meal at some restaurant ahead of us. So I've jumped in the van and I've gone forward and I've gone to the fish and chip shop and I bought enough fish and chips for all of us. Robbo, Spanner, Pam, me and the other officials. We get back to the bus. Bruce, I was sitting on the doorstep of the bus. The packet of fish and chips was on his back and I just kept feeding it in. I don't think we even got a chip. He ate the whole bloody lot himself, and it was so funny.
But after a week of rice pudding and canned fruit, you know what I mean, you've got to have a change of diet. But in actual fact, before that, just stepping back a little bit, I remember going through the South Australian outback around Iron Knob. There was a plague of locusts. Absolute plague, and they were rising off the road like clouds, and I'm riding through them, and they were sticking on the chain and in the cogs and going down the neck, and that was for about an hour of this infestation of locusts. And at the same time, I was getting a pain in my thigh, a really bad pain, and I thought, all I can do is soft pedal my right leg and just follow the pedal with my left leg. So I was losing a lot of time. And by the time we got to Port Augusta, I couldn't go on. Anyhow, Ken said, look, we'll have to go to the hospital. So it was marked the spot where I stopped, in the bus, up to Mount Augusta, not Mount Augusta, Port Augusta Hospital. And Ken knew something about these new drugs that were out. There's something called cortisone. And he goes in there with great authority and says to the head doctor, this man needs a cortisone injection or something like that. And so they came out with a syringe, and chucked it in my thigh. And the pain vanished like magic. Back on the bike, back down the hill again, back to where to start, back on the bike, and off we go again. So, I think that was a 24-hour ride to pick up on the record, because I had so many stops, so many problems that I had to ride 24 hours, I think it was.
Yeah, it was a long day.
It was a long day. I was falling asleep, I can remember that I kept on sort of waking up with a jar.
Yeah.
You know? So I was thrilled that I got one record out of the way. And in actual fact, I think the Adelaide to Sydney record probably still stands, because no one would do that. But anyhow, so we got to Adelaide. I had a rest there, and the following, then it was on to Melbourne. I don't think anything specific happened on that bit of Melbourne.
Well, you might remember it, but I certainly
do. You remember it? Yeah.
There was one, we had to go over Mount Lofty, which is that big mountain that heads out of Adelaide. And some young snipper jumped onto his wheel as he started to tackle Mount Lofty. Well, if there's anything that myths of bike riders, having someone sit on the back and not give you any help. Well, he couldn't have the help. So this young guy followed Bruce all the way over Mount Lofty. And halfway between Adelaide and Melbourne, we cut, in the middle of the night, we hit these massive hills. I can't remember where they were. And Bruce just let the bike go, said, that's it, a couple of F words, I'm not doing this anymore. And I said, don't you want to race? So I grabbed the bike out of the bush, held him up, got hold of his arm. I said, well, let's walk up the hill. We'll walk the hill. And of course, we get halfway up the hill and he said, give me that bloody bike back. And so I realised my job with this journey was, apart from organising, was a psychologist and a physiotherapist and a medico and a cook and a half a dozen other things. So
a media coordinator.
Yeah. But we hit Melbourne, just so, because Bruce and I discussed this just before you guys came in. And we've got gaps where one can remember one and the other. So that's why I'm interjecting here. But we hit Melbourne at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning. Well, anyone who knows Melbourne, it's a big industrial city. And there's traffic everywhere at that time of the day. But because we were conscious of the time, one of us, it was either Peter or me or Spanner, would be standing on the doorstep when we got to a traffic lights, because you've got to stop and this car's going. So we just grab him and hold him up so he didn't have to take his foot out. And then as soon as the lights went green, we'd shove him off, jump back on the bus, and then wait till we get to the next one. So we went all that way from the outer metropolitan area of Melbourne into St Kilda, doing that with every set of traffic lights. So I think I must have ran about a marathon in that section.
I remember when I got to Melbourne, and the media were there, the cameraman was there, and anyhow, he missed it me coming in. So I said, "Can you go back and do it again?" So I had to go back about a quarter of a mile and ride in again.
Yeah, and the whole deal when Bruce explained it. Yes, we knew the time that Vic Brown rode. So we knew where he was when he was. So we always had a measuring stick to how the record was going. And of course, logic dictates as long as you stay ahead of that time. But we got to Melbourne, we perched ourselves and we all needed to rest. I think it was in that St Kilda Park or something there. And then suddenly the timekeeper came up and said, "Ken, I think we're stuffed up. We've been sitting here for 6 hours. But we should have been on the road. We're now falling back behind." So there was panic stations again, getting Bruce onto the bike. And I mentioned before, if anyone's ever driven from Melbourne to Sydney on the Hume Highway with those semi-trailers, they were just like caterpillars going up every hill. So poor old Bruce, not only got headwinds, he's getting slammed by lorries going past and riding through the middle of the night because we were behind schedule.
In actual fact, that was the only tailwind I got, was 100 kilometres from Melbourne out.
That's why you picked up.
Yeah, picked up some time. But that was the only tailwind I got on the whole of the trip. And I remember Bob Farley from Peugeot, he said, once you get over Pretty Sally, this hill going out of Melbourne, you'll be right. You know, he said, pretty steep, but once you get over that, you'll be pretty right. So anyhow, I'm going. And I dropped back to Bob Farley in his car and I said, "Bob, when do we get to this bloody hill, this bridge?" He said, you're already over it. So I thought, I didn't notice it. Yeah, so as Ken said, it was a bit horrifying, trucks coming past, but there was no such thing as a metre.
No bike lane.
No bike lane and no metre gap. They were just coming past right by my shoulder, one after the other.
Yeah.
And when I got to WAHCC, there was that wooden bridge, a wooden bridge about a mile long, with planks and nails sticking up and all sorts. And it was like, pick a plank and stay on that plank. But then all of a sudden it had changed, and you've got to hop over to the next plank.
The planks are running parallel to where you're going.
Yeah.
Not across.
No.
Parallel.
Yeah. But every now and again they change. There'd be a different set, and you'd hop across there. But I think Sid Freshwater, the guy from
He met us out there,
New South Wales.
Parramatta somewhere.
Yeah, he came a long way out. He met us there, and he had some sort of coordination with the police, and he managed to get a clearance with the police to come out and meet me and guide me through the traffic of Sydney.
What time were you talking about?
We're talking coming into Sydney now.
Early in the morning?
Yes, it was very early in the morning, coming in for rush hour. Yeah, coming in for rush hour. And Sid Freshwater said, look, the police will not allow you to ride in at this time of day. You're going to have to stop. So I had to stop, and it was quite a long stop. And
because you're only just a few hours ahead of the record at the moment, aren't you?
no, I'm well ahead. I'm about 6 hours ahead.
Okay.
6 or 7 hours.
Yeah.
7 hours, I think it was ahead. But anyhow, so there were these police motorcycles came and they flanked me all the way into Sydney. You know, they had sirens going and the whole thing. I felt the man, you know, this is pretty cool. But the problem was, because I was getting a ride through Sydney and they're stopping traffic at traffic lights and all that sort of thing, the bus and couldn't keep up. So I got to Martin Place probably 10 minutes before the bus, or the timekeeper, 10 minutes. So I couldn't be given a time until Stan Hastings, the timekeeper, could actually see me. So in actual fact, it was slightly quicker than what I did, but it really didn't matter as it was. Anyhow, from there we went on to Bondi Beach, didn't we?
Yeah. But this bit that Bruce is alluding to, yeah, they said, no, we can't do that. You just have to wait. You have to stop at every light, right? But what happened was, as soon as we got going, these policemen and their motorbikes and cars, they just got wrapped up in the euphoria of this attempt, and suddenly their lights were blazing. And I jumped in the van, his combi with Pam, and I thank God Benson Hedges was a sponsor, because I smoked a whole packet in those.
You never smoked before?
No, I never smoked, but I finished the packet on that ride. And yeah, we got there just marginally after Bruce was sitting at the post office, and then we all rock up, and the official time was taken, and we went down to Bondi.
Yeah.
Was there any crowd there to receive you, or media?
Nobody. There was at Bondi. We had media came out to Bondi, but there was no one there at Martin Place where the record finished at post office.
Yeah.
There was no one there.
No.
It's just me, Sid Freshwater, and our team, and that was it. But that was Sid Freshwater was one of the official observers. So, and the strange thing is, I had to have observers the whole time, so I had to be watched the whole time. And the Victorian League of Wheelmen insisted that I was watched by an independent observer from each state, you know. And that was another problem, wasn't it? Getting someone to come out, you know. And in Victoria, no one came out, but luckily Rob Farley from Peugeot, who was affiliated with the League of Wheelmen, he came out and he acted as being the official observer, so that worked. Yeah. But I think your man Bill Long was determined it wouldn't happen. Yeah.
Were there any costs involved with these officials coming out, or with like Stan or Spike Perich?
No, fortunately
Everyone donated.
Everyone donated.
Yeah.
And Ken had to get time off from the fire brigade to officiate or to be there, and Peter Robinson had to take time off from work to do it. And I think it's 3 weeks in all, wasn't it?
Yeah, because once we left Sydney, we had an appointment in Canberra. Didn't we have to go to Canberra to the...
No, we had to go to Melbourne, to Peugeot in Melbourne.
Right.
But then we had the media engagements in Sydney and then in Melbourne, so we couldn't get going. You know?
No, they hosted, they put on food, and so they did recognise it officially. And then we had the long haul to get home. And Bruce, I don't know if you rode at anything coming home.
I did.
But your hands, Bruce, when we got there, Bruce's hands were locked on the bar. Yeah. Fixed. Yeah. And for weeks after that,
they were paralysed. Yeah.
They couldn't open.
Paralysed like that. I couldn't even turn the ignition key on. To turn the ignition key, I'd use the whole hand to turn the ignition key because I couldn't do anything. But they were absolutely wrecked.
Yep. But Bruce, I think that also typifies just how hard you rode.
Yeah.
You know, how concentrated.
Yeah, it was you can see it in the picture here. You can see the fingers on the end sticking out.
Yeah.
They were paralysed.
Just backing up another one. One thing I learnt from Bruce is that he mentioned before how we would tell him this mystery guy's up the road, you're catching on him, and that was always on the go. But he'd be riding along, and we were in the bus, and we had a few beers, and we ate, and we were okay. And we'd come back, and Bruce would say something like, "How far to whatever?" And of course, you know, being a psychologist, I'd drop a few Ks off the distance, and I'd tell him, he said, "Bullshit." He knows exactly, he knew where he was, when he was, and how far it was to the next anything. So he had this going in his head the whole time, which is indicative of Bruce. He's very specific, probably from his photography business, I don't know. But he worked it all out in his head, almost to the kilometre, when we were using a vehicle to check the miles and the milepost. But that's what he was doing. He'd count them off, and he knew where he was, when he was.
Going back to those paralysed fingers, when I got back to Perth, I went to see a doctor, and the doctor said, what we need to do is cut the tendons and to release the fingers. And I thought, how comes the tendons couldn't shrunk, surely? So I went to see another doctor, and it was a similar sort of thing. Yeah. And I can't remember who it was now. I think it was, it might have been Mike Dyke, might have been you, I can't recall. But I was advised to go and see a chiropractor. And there was a chiropractor over in South Perth, name of Vardy. And I went to see him, and he took an x-ray. He said, "There's nothing wrong with your fingers." He said, "It's your neck. You've put your neck out." And I said, "How are you?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Look, just sit there for a second." And he got hold of my head and went, and there was a great crack down my back. Oh, bloody hell, he's broken my neck. And anyhow, he said, "Look, come back in another week and see me, and we'll see how you go." Within a day, my fingers had come right. I thought, bugger that, I'm not going back again. And that was it. Yeah. So I didn't believe in chiropractors or anything like that. I thought that's all, that's all black magic. But it worked. I couldn't believe it. And it was the nerves trapped in my neck from all the falls I had. Yeah.
This is a personal question.
Yeah.
How did you wipe his bum?
It was very delicate.
I'm not going there, Joe. What stays on the bus, what happened on the bus stays on the bus.
I've got a couple of questions. There was one thing, we've spoken about this before, Rob Slater.
Yes.
Now, the story went something like, you were of the understanding that Peugeot was going to be part of the money and all that sort of stuff, but you learned something about Rob did.
Yeah. Well, Rod Slater from Eurocars, he was the agent for Peugeot bikes, so he brought them in. And anyhow, when he heard about the record attempt, he thought, I'll get a bit of this action. So he then come on board, and he said, I wish you'd told me earlier, because we didn't need Benson and Hedges, but he would have sorted it all. And anyhow, he'd asked, I think it was Warren Rudd, I can't remember if it was Warren Rudd, or he was a cyclist, or whether it's Stan Fennell, but Rod Slater asked, is he capable of doing it? And I think it was Warren Rudd. He said, and Warren Rudd said, he won't quit. That's what he said. He didn't say he'll do it. He just said he won't quit. And Rod Slater. So then it was on. Anyhow, it wasn't until we got back to Perth. That I found out that Rod Slater had sponsored it out of his own pocket, on the basis that if I broke the record, Peugeot would pay him back. But I didn't know that. I thought Peugeot from the eastern states had got on board, but they hadn't. It was just Rod Slater doing it out of goodwill, in the hope that I'd do it. And fortunately I did. Otherwise it'd have been out of pocket a lot of money, because I don't know what it cost, because we was in motels in Sydney and Melbourne, was it? I think Sydney. We were in motels. We was definitely in a motel for about 3 days in Sydney. And sorry?
Melbourne stayed at someone's house.
Did we? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so anyhow, I don't know. So there's 6 of us staying in a motel for several days, and that's not cheap, and being fed as well. So I don't know what that cost, and I didn't want to know.
Well, Pam, because she was the bookkeeper. She had all the money.
You would bookkeeper.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, as I say, that didn't come to light till much later.
Yeah.
And I kept one of the bikes. The other one went back into stock because I never really used it.
Yeah.
It was only there in case. But unfortunately, I've been asked several times where the bike is. That isn't the bike I rode. It's similar, but that's not the bike I rode. But when I got back to Perth, I thought, well, I'll keep the Peugeot bike, but I'll change the geometry and I'll change the top tube, because the top tube was 23 inches. Well, a 23-inch top tube on a 21-inch frame is a bit long. So I got someone to alter it, shorten the top tube, and also reduce the geometry.
Yeah.
So from 74-degree head to 72. And anyhow, did that. When I tried to race the damn thing, it wouldn't steer properly. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do now? I'm sponsored by Peugeot. So I took all the equipment off, sprayed my bike that I originally had white, put Peugeot stickers on it, and bolted all the Peugeot equipment on it. So I rode the season for Peugeot on a speed light. And I've been asked several times if I've still got the frame, because at one time the museum of not this museum, but a museum asked for if they could put it in on display alongside Steele Bishop's world title bike.
Yeah.
And of course it didn't exist. The only thing that exists from that bike that I'm aware of is a front changer in a cabinet over there. And the only reason that front changer exists is because I broke it when I was tightening up the clamp. So I took it off. But that's the only part of the bike that survives that I'm aware of. Maybe the rest of the bike does survive somewhere, but I'm not aware of it.
I have one more question with
Yeah.
regards to the logistics of the ride before we close this part and then hand it over to the
sure.
audience. How did you organise the convoy and sleeping arrangements and stuff like that? Did you have one car ahead, one behind? Did one drive ahead? Were you sleeping in the vans?
I slept there, yeah. I slept in, yeah. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but I slept in the van for the first couple of days.
The van or the bus?
In the van, in the combi van, and anyhow, I think one of the guys got in the van and tried to sleep. Said, "How the hell are you sleeping on that? It's too hard. You better sleep in the bus." So from then on, I rested in the bus, not in the van. But I don't know what the sleeping arrangements were for anybody else. I didn't ask. All I did was ride the bike. I didn't. I wasn't aware of anything apart from where I was.
So the two vehicles were always in the convoy. No, you didn't have a bus disappearing into Adelaide to buy supply.
Yeah, well, no,
yes, they did.
The beauty of having the WAHCC van was that if we needed to push ahead or do something, or the bus was always coming. But the thing, I think the timekeeper had to get into the combi because he had to be visually in, and so with Spike.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So there may have been times when we swapped around, and I can't. I know one of the pictures shows Spike Jones driving the bus, and I'm licensed to drive the Paris.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm Robbo could fill in the gap. Did Spanner drive it, or did he drive it? Is he still here?
He's gone.
Oh, okay. So I'm not sure who did the most driving, but probably Jack Paris, because he was the official and he was capable of doing it.
Yeah, well, he was referee.
Yeah.
Spike Pace was referee. But, and Stan Hastings, who was the timekeeper, he was an official timekeeper ratified by the RTTC in England, but I think it carried over to Australia. So I had an authentic team, you know.
Yeah.
But as I say, when I first hit on the idea of doing it, I had no idea of the logistics. If it hadn't have been for Ken coming on board, I think it would have gone arse up for sure, because I don't know how it would have worked. Because from those early beginnings of thinking that Marty Hopkins was going to follow me in his Morris 1100 to the ending up with a bus and a car, you know, it was an amazing turnaround. yeah, I can't think of anything else I can add to that, really. It's 50 years ago, for God's sake, you know, suddenly being sort of hit with this. I've had to sort of reread stuff to find out what the hell I did. Yeah. But I remember when I got back to Perth, there was a bike dealer here, one of the major bike dealers here, who put the story out about I did a lot of it in the back of the bus.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe that anybody would believe that, seeing as I had the officials that I had. But the story was put about that I spent a lot of time riding in the bus, which of course was totally untrue. And then when I rode the Australian road titles the following year in Adelaide, I was silver medalist in that race, came second in the Australian long distance road title. And at the presentations, it occurred to me that they didn't believe it over the East either. They didn't believe I'd done. But after I finished, they said, well, obviously you did do it. You did do it, because they thought this is someone they've not heard of, as anyone from West Australia's hardly ever heard of in the eastern states. And they thought, well, that's not possible, that it couldn't have been done. And of course, I had the officials to prove it. And then when I went up to get the award at the presentations, they said, well, we realise now that we were mistaken. You were capable. And I did ride the Sun Tour the following year, the one that they rejected me for. But unfortunately, I punctured 4 times on the first day and crashed. So,
Can I ask, because I'm a bit vague, what did you get in terms of recognition of the ride? Is there any paperwork or any certificate, or
all I got was from the Guinness Book of Records. It was listed in the Guinness Book of Records, the Ample Book of Records, and I think there's a letter from the Australian the League of Wheelmen, authenticating it. Right. Yeah, but that's about all. I kind of completely forgotten about all this until fairly recently. I was asked by the Rotary Club to give a speech about the record attempt, and also about my wife and I when we travelled overland in the car in a little Renault 4. That's a different story, but I was asked that was the first time in 48 years anyone's ever asked me anything about it. And I was trying to sort of recollect, so I'm looking at scrapbooks and thinking, oh yeah. And anyhow, Ken being here and yourself jogging my memory, it's sort of it has come together a bit. But as I say, it's not something I'm going to do again. And I'm not
Oh, you said 50th anniversary.
Well, you want me to do a lap of honour, do you? It was mentioned to me, actually. It was mentioned. There's someone here did mention it to me. It's been 50 years. Would you do it again? And that gentleman's here. But I don't think it's going to happen.
well, there had to be a lot more dollars.
Oh yeah.
To get you.
I wouldn't know what it finally cost, but it had to be in the region of $6,000 or $7,000. I would have thought.
I'd be interested to know what the record is now.
I think it's down to about 6.5 days, isn't it?
7 days, 9
Is it
7 days, 9 hours. Yeah.
That's sealed.
Yeah, sealed, but they don't go to Adelaide and Melbourne. They go straight across. So they cut off about 700 kilometres.
Yeah. It's not the whole journey.
Yeah, I had to do it according
Same
to the
as
League of Wheelmen. I had to do it the same as what the record had been set.
Yeah.
But of course, Vic Brown broke Hubert Opperman's record, and he didn't ride a Hubert Opperman's course. Hubert Opperman rode along the railway, not along the railway tracks, but the access road that runs alongside the railway. He rode on that. He didn't actually ride on the air highway.
Yeah.
And apparently the track alongside the railway was lightning fast in compared with the air highway. But I can't verify, that's just what I've read. But of course, the kind of bike that Hubert Opperman rode is sitting down there. I mean, it's an absolute grenade. Well, I wouldn't have thought he'd been seen dead on a bike like that, but as ever, there it is. Yeah. But now, of course, what we got, I don't know what that bike weighed. I think it weighed about 22 pounds or something like that. Now you're riding bikes of 6 kilos, something like that, 6 kilos, which is just over 12 pounds. Yeah. £12 with disc wheels, all the gear, tri-bars.
Got the bike down there.
They're almost, it's almost uncomparable. You know? So that was the beginning of the tri-bar scene there. But if I'd have had that, I would have been far more comfortable, I think. Yeah, so I think that's I don't think I can add much more to it than that. All right.
Right,
That's about
fantastic.
it.
Thank you very much. That concludes our first In Conversations With. Please give Bruce Hunt and Ken Norris a hand.